Let's go on here to Pennsville, New Jersey. Hello.
Hello. If I remember what your guest said earlier, I believe he stated something to the effect that it's worse to have a plan that has never been tried than it is to have none at all. And I certainly agree with that philosophy wholeheartedly. I live next to what will be 3 nuclear power plants, 2 that have a terrible record down here in New Jersey, and 1 that's being built. Now, in order for them to get their license, it was my understanding that FEMA had to approve an evacuation plan. Now, I can assure the director of FEMA that the people down here do not know what that plan is all about.
That was the question I was asking you before about rehearsals, but go ahead.
Absolutely. Anyone you walk down the street and ask about this plan, I can assure you they will say they know nothing about it. We know there is a plan, but it has not been tested. And I think, in all fairness to the residents who live near these nuclear power plants, and it is your responsibility, something ought to be done so that the people around here know what to do. I think it's very, very discouraging.
All right. How about that, Mr. Giuffrida?
Well, I don't know which where the callers refer. Are you referring
to the Salem Nuclear Power Station?
Salem. Okay.
Right, for Salem 1 and 2, and Hope Creek's being built.
Okay.
Well, I have to tell you that I don't have at my disposal the plan status and the test status of that particular power plant, but I will, if you'll send your question to me at my office.
Sure.
I'll tell you again what that is.
Did you get his address earlier?
Yeah, I know where the regional office is, too.
All right, fine.
We've been pushing for the plan.
Okay.
But I still say, it's no good until it's been tested, like you said.
Where would a person who wanted to see that plan, surely it has to be a matter of public record, and you have to be able to go someplace to be able to read it. Where would a person go in her situation?
Well, of course, the plan is written not by my office, but by the community there. But she's already correctly identified the regional office. Are you is it Region 2 in New York?
Yes.
Yeah, well, then you've already gone to the right place. But I'll invite you again to, if your question, you want to put it in writing to me, go ahead, and I'll pulse the regional office and get a reader. I honestly don't know what the status of that particular one is.
Well, I just wonder, around the country with so many in operation now and so many failures going on at them, whether other areas of the country are in the same situation that we are.
Well, I don't know. I can't address what you mean by the number of failures that there are, but the system is correct as you identified it. FEMA has to check the plan, and there has to be a rehearsal. Then FEMA makes a recommendation to the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, and they're the ones who make the decision on the licensing. We're not in the licensing business. We're in the testing of the plans business, and we can't do that until the plan has been written.
And that has to go all through the Nuclear Regulatory Agency on its way to you, too, doesn't it?
No, it doesn't go to NRC on its way to us, but it has to involve the state and the local government
all right.
before it comes to us.
We'll get this all sorted out here. All right, we got to go. Hello, Columbus, Ohio.
Yes, Jim, I'd like to talk to is it Mr. Giuffrida?
That's right. Go right ahead.
I'd like to know what he would do. He's a former military man. What he would do if we had an emergency bombing here in the United States. What was his first actions?
An
emergency, or had an attack.
His first actions. He's a former military man, so am I.
Well, I suppose the first part of my answer would be it would depend on where I was. If I was at home, I would go first to try to get my wife and children someplace from where I perceive, other than where I perceive the danger to be. If I were at my office, I would immediately make sure that the office SOPs were being implemented, that the EBS was being activated, and everything else that had to happen.
That would be how you'd swing into action, and then hoping that the system you've already set up is operating as it should.
Yes.
What personal preparations, Mr. Giuffrida, have you made personally to prepare for an emergency?
You mean in my family, sir?
Yes, sir.
Well, obviously, I've talked to my wife and children. I've got...
What have you done now? That's what I want to know.
Okay, let him answer now. Come on. You've talked to your wife and children. You've gone over a plan,
a personal plan for my family, yes. A private plan, in the sense that I've instructed my wife and children to follow whatever instructions come from the government. then my action would be to report to my duty station at FEMA, and we've agreed on where we would look for one another when the thing had calmed down a little.
I must admit, I've done the same thing with my family. We have a location where we would meet.
Yes.
At least we would wait for each other.
That's correct.
And I think that's probably the most sensible thing you can do. Hello, Wheaton, Illinois.
Yes. Our family has always been great on conditioning reflexes. We practicing, defensive driving, our home evacuations, and I work at a hospital. We have dry runs for surprise catastrophes. I'm very aware of the signal that we've been having for years around the Chicago area. In fact, it was so routine, it always came on Tuesday at 11 o'clock. Now, I've been aware lately that it never comes on the same day. Is this does the radio station or the TV station select their time to play this, and do they report to a regional office of yours? And it's always followed by, this was a test, this was a test. If it had been a reality, we would be told what station to turn to.
That's correct.
And given information on what to do following. But does your agency know which radio stations and which stations are playing these spots?
Oh, yeah, you do. I mean, this is on a scheduled basis, isn't it?
Is it optional for the radio station?
You asked for about several questions. Let me try to answer the ones you've asked up to now.
I'm sorry.
The station makes its schedule. It's part of an overall schedule that's maintained by and established by FCC. FEMA's a part of that routine, and the stations report to the various regions throughout the United States. It is, in fact, precisely that, a test of the system. And the reason for preceding and following it with the disclaimers that it's a test obviously would stem from such things as the Orson Welles thing.
That's right.
And from shows that come on like this last...
Yeah, how did you feel about that broadcast, which really used all the techniques of modern electronic journalism in a dramatic thing?
Okay.
I'd like to get your personal opinion of that thing.
I didn't think much of it. And I think that the most significant thing that came out of it was the comment that came from the news broadcaster who was reporting the number of casualties, which was then at about 2,000, I think, in the script. And he said, just imagine what it would have been had we not had in place our civil defense plan, our evacuation plan, which to me was an intriguing statement, because it pointed out exactly what it is that we're trying to put in place.
Okay. All right. I think, however, that if you use those kind of techniques in a dramatic presentation, after a while you tend to inure people to them, and I think that should be reserved for the real business of broadcasting news, which is to inform people the things they need to know.
Well, I think they call it poetic license.
And I don't like it a bit.
Yeah, I don't either.
We'll get back to more of it in just a minute.
From the nation's capital, you're listening to The Larry King Show. Once again, sitting in for Larry, here's Jim Slade.
And having an interesting time of doing it, too. Let's go on to Madison, Wisconsin. Hello.
Hello. I would first like to preface my statement with a question, and that is, if we always are willing to match the Soviet Union in missiles and in bombers, etc., why can't we match them in civil defense? Now, the first point I would like to make is to say that I believe that in all of our cities we should have subway systems, which would be used as shelters, as they are in the Soviet Union, and also that all the grain, which is now being stored in Kansas and South Dakota, etc., should be moved to these inner-city shelters and stored there for use in emergency. Point number two, I believe that all new schools which are to be built in this country should have atomic shelters and food there in case of an emergency. And point number three I'd like to make, and say this quite simply, is that the real threat of evacuation does not come from a massive nuclear war, but comes from nuclear blackmail. For example, there have been a number of books written about Libyans, for example, coming to New York and blackmailing the United States into making some sort of political move. If we do not have evacuation in our deck of cards, then we are going to be more subject and more likely to be blackmailed by a group of terrorists.
All right, let's see how he responds to your premise.
Well, I think that the caller's concern about the need for an evacuation system as a part of an overall emergency response plan is a very valid concern.
Is this assumption that the Soviet Union is better at it than we are?
Well, the Soviet Union has been at it longer and spends a great deal more money. We're asking for $253 million to start the program. The Soviet Union runs about $3 billion.
Mm-hmm.
The Soviet Union has organized units, both military and what they call volunteer, which is something less than our version of volunteer. In the Soviet Union, the head of every government sub-entity, the head of every business, the head of every factory is the civil defense coordinator and is personally responsible for the adequacy of the plan. I wouldn't want to impose on our system the autocracy of the Soviets, because one of the things that I've been committed to all my adult life is that this administration is committed to, I might add, for us, solutions to problems cannot be simply effective. They must also be acceptable, and acceptable within the parameters of our traditional American way of measuring individual liberties and group and community responsibilities. As far as the food is concerned, your concern about food is a legitimate one. I'm sure you've recognized, however, that simply to move grain from one place to another of itself doesn't solve the food problem, because a lot of the food that's in storage is not in
processed form.
Not in processed form, right?
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. Novi in Michigan. Hello, Novi.
Good morning, Jim.
Tell me where Novi is.
Novi is just outside Detroit.
Novi. All right, I spelled it wrong. All right, fine.
That's okay. They used to say before they built a huge shopping mall, there were sweatshirts, Jim, that said, "Where in the hell is Novi?" Anyway, I have two quick questions for Mr. Giuffrida, and I want to thank you for a terrific one-liner. I'm a bartender, and the next time some Weisenheimer makes a crack at me, I'm going to say, "Don't burlesque my answer."
All right.
I love it. But, Mr. Giuffrida, when that horrendous noise comes on, I want...
What do you mean, the emergency warning system?
That Kano thingamajig.
Okay.
I want to ask you, is the decibel count actually really higher, or does it merely seem that way to me?
1,000-cycle tone, isn't it?
That's what it is. My name is pronounced Giuffrida.
Oh, I beg your pardon.
Yeah, it's a proud Italian name. No, it seems louder because I think what happens to each of us is that we tune down the stuff that we're accustomed to, and when something else intrudes on that, we hear it right away.
My objection is, does it really have to be 30 seconds long? I think it's never going to end.
Me too.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's I don't know, but that's the length of time that it takes to really run through the whole system, you see. That part is almost immutable.
Okay, my other question, I'm not going to try the name, I still am not sure.
Giuffrida.
Giuffrida.
There you go.
Okay. I've often wondered, I've really wondered, with the way the sophisticated jamming systems, etc., kind of a two-pronged question here. Could the signal be jammed in the case of an emergency, and/or could false information be given to us?
Those are two good questions, though. Any signal that hasn't been specifically addressed, that is, both the transmitting and the receiving equipment that hasn't been specifically designed to protect it against jamming, as you call it, can be jammed.
Yeah.
Okay, however, much in the news these days is something called electromagnetic pulse. And we in FEMA and the Defense Department and FCC and I might say the private sector industries also are putting an awful amount of time and attention and money into trying to prevent precisely that. As far as putting on spurious or disinformation through the system, that would be difficult. It's not impossible, but it would be difficult because we control the system and could override it, you see.
All right, we're going to have to move on. You're saying that a person couldn't tap into your teletype system or your communication system?
No, I didn't say that, Jim. I said it could be done. It'd be tough.
Okay. All right, we'll buy that. All right, we'll get back to more questions and more answers for Louis Giuffrida, who is the director of the Federal Emergency Management Agency, right after these words. We're running out of time this hour, so let's rush along. Hello, Atlanta.
Yes. Did I hear your guest earlier speak on the function of government?
Well, since he's very, very intimately involved in it, no doubt you did.
But he addressed it specifically, I think. Is this the only guest you've had this evening?
Yeah, that's right. In what terms? Are you talking about the question I asked him during the interview period in which I said that does he sometimes think that perhaps government is performing the big brother function? Is that what you mean?
I think that may be close.
All right. What's your point? And he said, of course, he believes that it's a legitimate function of what's going on. He didn't call himself big brother.
Well, my question is, according to the United States Constitution, which all of us live by, supposedly, the function of government has nothing to do with monitoring of individual rights or anything like that. The function of government is to provide for the national defense, first of all.
Well, that's a very interesting point you just made. I think you answered your own question, did he not?
What I said was that all governments historically, even tribal councils, have been formed to put into place a system that would protect the lives of the citizens. That was my statement, sir.
Well, let me ask you a question. A government can only exist as long as its citizens describes it as legitimate. Would you agree or disagree?
I would agree so long as the majority of the government exists as a government that's legitimate, as long as the majority of the citizens of that country want it. Yeah.
Well, what's your point?
Well, my point is, and I'm afraid I missed part of what he said.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why I'm really asking a question more than trying to make a point.
Well, I
want some clarification of what he said.
Well, I think he just said it. If you'll think back on what he said, that it is a function, and that it is a function that the people who represent the people of the United States have found necessary, and therefore we're going ahead with it. And certainly, I don't think, and I think I agree with Mr. Giuffrida, that the individual municipalities couldn't afford to do this on their own. It's just too wild. It's too big. Let's go on to Boston. Hello, Boston.
Yes, good evening. I would like to say that I've enjoyed your show.
Thank you.
FEMA is essentially apolitical, but I felt it was important for all your listeners to know that there's, I think, a significant pocket of Americans, loyal and patriotic Americans, who do not support FEMA in its efforts for civil defense, specifically against the nuclear threat. My own feeling in Boston is, frankly, that the program itself actually could be a more destabilizing factor, actually more threatening to the population as a whole. I think it gives an illusion of security to people where, in fact, there is none in the face of nuclear war. I could envision the president deciding to evacuate the cities in a moment of crisis and having the Russians fear that we were going to launch a first strike. And I think, frankly, as with many people, that the only security and safety for us is a reasonable, mutually verifiable arms control and reduction.
You sound familiar to me. Are you one of the physicians against nuclear?
I am a physician at Harvard Medical School, but I am not in the organization.
Okay, fine. Let's get his point of view there, because you raise a very interesting point of view.
Well, I think that the caller will concede that. I will concede to the caller that we have a universal desire, in fact, a determination to avoid war. I'm not sure that I follow the logic, however, from that determination to try to prevent war, that you don't have in place, and the only emergency that this country faces is not war. And what we've been trying to build, and will in fact build, is an integrated system where the system can respond to emergencies like floods,
Mount St. Helens,
an accident at Yankee, or anything else. And you have the same precisely when you scrub, when you're going to do a surgical procedure on a man's leg, or whether you're going to operate on a bypass, you still have essentially the same scrub, the same ER procedures, and that should be very comfortable for you to understand why I say we need precisely the same kind of capability. Then you make the value judgment, but you call on all the assets. You don't say, I'm going to do only a leg, so don't bring in the anesthesiologist and his bypasser and the rest of them. You bring in the whole system, and you know you have the system there if you need it, and that's exactly so what we're trying to do for every emergency that this country might face.
All right. Thank you. We're running out of time here, and I wanted to ask you, I understand Mount St. Helens is getting grumpy again. You got some people watching that?
We sure have, and we're spending hundreds of millions of dollars trying to respond and to mitigate the consequences of that thing.
Maybe we can talk about it a little bit more after we have a break for the news. My name is Jim Slade, and this is the Larry King Show. Larry's not here, of course. And as usual, we're here on Mutual, which is your network for news and sports.
From the nation's capital, Mutual Radio presents The Larry King Show, Network Radio's leading coast-to-coast talk program. Call now at 703-685-2177. That's 703-685-2177. Let the connection ring. We'll answer when it's your turn. And now, sitting in for Larry, here is Jim Slade.
People are placing those calls from all over America today. Our guest is Louis Giuffrida, who is director of the Federal Emergency Management Agency, and we're talking about the things that may affect your lives, and hopefully never, but that are there in case it's needed. Hello, Fairfax, Virginia.
Hello, Jim.
How are you?
Hear your voice again.
Thank you.
Mr. Giuffrida?
Yes, ma'am?
I'd like to ask a question that's been bothering me about the civil defense thing. The United States as a country, I grew up, I was a child during World War II, and we went through all this business of air raid warnings and all that stuff. We have never been bombed by conventional bombs. And so even though we've had evacuations for tornadoes and stuff, the country as a whole has never been under a bomb alert. It sounds to me that the civil defense efforts are sort of based on another war, a war that happened 30 years ago, the English evacuations and so forth. Do you really believe that a nuclear war can be handled the same way a conventional war, as we conceive a conventional war to be?
Well, first of all, ma'am, the civil defense plan is not built on a war bombing. The civil defense plan is a plan that would permit the government to call into action an organized, coordinated response to whatever the emergency happened to be. Mm-hmm. One of those emergencies might be war, hopefully never will be.
But that's what bothers people. I mean, people do understand that they have to give and help when people are flooded out or tornadoes happen. But the entire United States is concerned about what the publicity has been about planning for a first strike against us or a second strike in a nuclear war, which is uppermost in most people's mind. And can you compare that with the kind of planning that went on during World War II?
Well, if the purpose of any evacuation plan, irrespective of the source of the danger, is to take people from where the danger is to some place where they'd be safer. And yes, I think obviously that if, irrespective of the cause of the danger, if you're equipped with a plan that has been properly financed and implemented, you can move people from high risk to areas of lesser risk, from nuclear weapons, which I hope will never happen, just as easily as you could, or not just as easily, but just with precisely the same requirements as you would for conventional war.
But the only knowledge we have of it is Nagasaki and Hiroshima, and those are the only two occasions on which nuclear bombs, and those were not nearly as powerful as the ones they have today.
Well, maybe.
But you're not addressing evacuation. You're talking damage.
Yeah, you're talking effect. You're not talking
There was no
about preparation
evacuation
time.
possible.
Yeah, well...
yeah, but that fits into that war that you described then, when there was, first of all, there was no predecessor for those two weapons, and there was no system built to identify what it would take to set that off, and...
nobody understood it.
No, nobody understood it then.
All right, let's go on to Arlington. Hello. Arlington, Virginia.
Hello. I guess what I had to say is similar to what the lady preceding me had to say. I think this is very misleading. The smallest weapon now is 50 times more powerful than those dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. You're talking here about dying immediately or dying a slow, painful, horrendous death. That's what we're talking about.
No, that's not what we're talking about.
There's no place you will be able to go where water and everything won't be contaminated.
Now, madam, that's not what I'm talking about.
Well, you're misleading the American people.
Well, let him answer your... Let him answer your statement now.
Well, first of all, it's not accurate for you to say that I'm misleading anybody, and that it's, to me is absolutely not true and not acceptable. If your point is that war is a human experience that we could all do without, I agree.
You're talking about a limited nuclear war.
No, I'm not talking about that at all, madam. I'm talking about the government's responsibility to have in place...
You're just wasting money.
Why not? Well, no, I don't... You won't let me finish. You see, if you're calling to ask a question and to have a dialogue, that's one thing. If you're calling to have a monologue or a pair of parallel monologues, that's something else. If you're asking me what we're trying to do, I'm telling you that what we're trying to do is what we're obligated to do by law, to have in place an effective, predictable, multi-agency, all levels of government response plan that will address whatever emergency this country faces, and that in no way, even by the most elastic stretch of logic, can be equated with being provocative or war inciting or anything of the sort.
But you said you were...
All right, we've run out of time on this one. I don't think it's going to go any further except in a circle, and we've reached the other end of the circle. We'll get back to more questions in just a moment. And let's keep the time going, get as many folks on as we can here. Lawrence, Kansas is on the line. Hello, Lawrence.
Hello. This is where some Russian athletes are participating in the KU relays. I'm interested in Mr. Giuffrida saying that the law is states that should prepare for any sort of an emergency, and in this discussion about the possibilities of nuclear war and emergency, I find myself disagreeing with the scenario, and I guess I'm not really disagreeing with Mr. Giuffrida. I'm disagreeing with the point of view of the lawmakers, apparently.
How so? How are you disagreeing?
Well, while I see an increasing possibility of nuclear war, I see it as an increasing possibility of accidental nuclear war and not intentional nuclear war on the part of either the Soviet Union or the United States.
Mm-hmm. But that doesn't, that has nothing to do with Mr. Giuffrida, of course.
Yeah, it has to do with the intention of the lawmakers.
I see. Okay.
Yeah.
Let's let him answer that, though. I shouldn't be talking.
Well, could I ask a question?
Okay, fine.
Okay. Does he think, well, I don't know.
No, he can hear you. You talk to him.
Yeah, I'm talking to him.
Okay.
I wonder, do you think that the lawmakers believed, or do you believe, either way, that the Russian leadership are really psychopathic bullies that would intentionally start a nuclear war, or do you think they basically proceed on the basis of the Russian national self-interest?
Well, I think you've answered your own question. I think that the Russian national self-interest, as they perceive it, has been the motive, the moving force there, and there's very little reason to be optimistic about the Russians ever looking after anybody's interests but their own. You need only to look at Afghanistan and all of the series of these things.
Is that the reason to hope for some stability between this?
Yeah.
Well, may I ask then a couple other short questions?
Okay, we've got 1 minute.
Okay. Do you think it's in their self-interest to preserve their population and their manufacturing areas and those sort of things that would be wiped out in a thermonuclear exchange?
Yes, I do.
Well, you see, I do too, and this leads me to believe that they would not intentionally start a nuclear war, but with the cruise missile and the Pershing II missiles that have such a short time from takeoff to explosion, I think there's a very great increase in the possibility of accidental nuclear war, and I don't know that our emergency preparedness plans address that sort of thing. I don't think they make sense in relationship to this possibility of accidental nuclear war.
Okay, we got to go, but let him answer your premise.
Well, I don't agree that they don't make sense. I think finally what you come to is, are we better off with a plan, irrespective